So for people that work to make the world a better place, I think it's critical that we're all future-wise. For corporations, they spend a lot of time thinking about what are consumers going to want a year from now, 20 years down the line. But for us that are in this field, we don't spend a lot of time doing that. It's a lot easier than you think. There's just 3 simple steps, and if you practice them consistently, you can both predict and shape what the future of the higher education system will look like. So first, a quick story. When I was a kid, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I had a serious independent streak. And we lived in an apartment on Lyndale and Franklin Avenues. For those of you that are familiar with Minneapolis, it's one of the busiest intersections in the Twin Cities. And so I constantly insisted on taking my bike out and driving around that intersection, which my mom, who's already naturally nervous, that made her really excited. That was also before the days of helmets, so it was, you were a goner if you got hit by a car. So my mom drilled into me that you needed to stop, look, and then go anytime you crossed an intersection. The beginning part of that statement was always, listen to me as I tell this to you, and please do these 3 steps. Now, the good thing is those are the exact same steps that you need to take to be future-wise. First, you need to stop, then you need to look, and then you need to move forward. So the first step, stop, is really about stop loving the problem. For those of you that have been in Minnesota for a long time, we have a bad habit here in the state of just loving and hugging and holding the problem and talking about how bad it is. And many of you have probably sat in lots of meetings where we do this. And a little while back, Angela Glover Blackwell, who's the leader over at Policy Link, which is a think tank in Oakland, came to Minnesota and did a presentation about mostly education disparities, but other disparities that we were facing both locally and nationally. And before she went up, there was a speaker that went before her that did the presentation that many of you have probably seen, where it is, here's the 100 ways where Minnesota is so bad. We are the worst in the achievement gap. We are the worst in this. We are the worst in that. And afterwards, the speaker sat down and Angela got up and she said, you know, my mom taught me to be polite, so I didn't want to look back while this really smart speaker was talking, but are you guys embarrassed? Because if I lived here, I would be really embarrassed if somebody was talking about my community and all these terrible things that were happening. And we all sort of shuffled uncomfortably in our seats. And I thought about it, and we haven't been embarrassed because it's felt like it's something that's happening to us rather than something that we actually need to do something about. So knowing the scope of the issue that you're working on is helpful, but it is definitely not the end. It is a very small part of the process, and I think many of us have gotten stuck in this part where we talk about how big the problem is. It's counterproductive to spend all of your time thinking about what isn't working. You really need to spend time thinking about what the solutions are and where we can make a difference. Another option is skipping the problem altogether. Instead of spending all of our time sort of wallowing in what isn't working, just skip it and move to the solution pieces. So here's an example of when the problem isn't really the problem. A couple of months ago, there was a children's and youth briefing, and the president of the University of Minnesota moderated this great panel of high school students and recent high school graduates that were now in college. And towards the end, he went off script a little bit, as many speakers do, and asked the students a question that many of us that have been doing education work for a long time think about. In Minnesota, we have shorter school days than many places in the country, and we have a shorter school year than many places in the world. And so what he asked the students is, I know this is, you know, it's sort of a question that it's hard if you're thinking about your own personal experience, but do you think we should have a longer school day or a longer school year? And the audience sort of giggled a little of what sort of high school student is going to say, sure, more time would be great. And so the students were silent. Nobody would answer the question. And so he pushed a little bit and said, come on, somebody answer. And finally he called on one of the students who is a young woman who's a junior in high school. And she said, well, in my high school, I have a lot of teachers who aren't engaged anymore, and they don't really seem to want to be teachers anymore. And during the day, I'm learning a lot of things that I can't imagine how I would actually use in the workforce, and it hasn't been really helpful. And so I don't know how a longer amount of time in school would actually solve any of those issues. Went, oh, maybe the problem that we've been working on isn't actually the problem at all. So sometimes you just need to skip the problem and move to a new place.